Welcome to Say More from Boston Globe Opinion. I'm Shirley Leung. Kamala Harris has chosen a running mate.
Since the day that I announced my candidacy, I set out to find a partner who can help build this brighter future.
Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota will be campaigning alongside Harris for the next 3 months.
Wow. Thank you, Philadelphia.
The Trump campaign has started their attacks. I have to admit, Walz was not really on my radar before this week, but I knew about his viral moment on cable news.
We do not like what has happened where we can't even go to Thanksgiving dinner with our uncle because you end up in some weird fight that is unnecessary. and I think bringing back people together, well, it's true. These guys are just weird.
In most elections, VP picks are an afterthought. This year, the stakes seem higher, and the choice really offers a great window into how a candidate thinks. I'm joined today by two of the smartest people in Globe Opinion. We're all nestled in the Globe's cozy podcast studio. I feel like we needed to give it a number, like, Studio 1A or something like that. But never mind, we don't really have another one, so maybe we can't give it a number. Anyways, here to my right elbow is Joan Vennochi, the great Globe Opinion columnist. Touching my left elbow is Carine Hajjar, Globe Opinion writer. Welcome, both of you, to Say More.
Thanks, Shirley.
Nice to be here, Shirley.
I know you guys are back again for more, right?
Yeah, glad to be back.
So, all right. So, Joan, talk to me about Tim Walz. I mean, why do you think Harris chose him?
Shirley, I'm going to be really honest with you. Everything I know about him, I learned in the last 24 hours, or almost everything I know about him.
Come on, you knew about the weird moment, right?
I did know about that. But I will say that I think the key thing that I learned about him was when I watched him deliver his first speech last night at that rally in Philadelphia. It was pretty awesome. I mean, he is a really good communicator. And if I had to guess, I'd say that was one of the key reasons why Harris picked him. The other things that, stand out about him is he's a Midwesterner, he's a former teacher, member of the National Guard, former member of the National Guard, former football coach. He is everything but coastal. And I think that's the other word of this campaign is vibe. That's the vibe that the Democrats and Harris are going for.
Joan, come on. He's an old white guy, right? Harris needed an old white guy to balance out the ticket.
It's interesting that you say he's old because they're virtually the same age.
But he looks old.
He looks like a grandfather.
Right.
But
I mean, it reminds me of when, you have this young Barack Obama running in 2008. And what did Obama needed? He needed a silver-haired Joe Biden. Also, I mean, what was great about Biden and Obama is that Biden spent a long time in the halls of Congress, and that was huge for Obama. And I think the same thing with Walz, right? I mean, he
certainly doesn't have the profile that Biden had when Obama picked him. But he is an old white guy. You're right about that part.
But it's been many years in Congress and allegedly, reportedly, close with Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker of the House, right?
So I hear.
So the Globe Opinion page is many of you are very unkind to the Walz pick, right? I mean, called him vanilla. I think one of you called him color me disappointment.
That was Shelley.
The taste Shelley said, yeah. The taste of disappointment for Walz.
So Carine, what do you think? What's your take on Walz? Did you know him prior to a day ago or 2 days ago?
Not really. I had heard his name in relation to the civil unrest in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder. But really, like Joan, the last 24 hours have been a crash course on Tim Walz. And I think he's an interesting pick for a lot of the reasons that Joan laid out. He certainly has a profile that balances out Kamala's profile going into this election. But people on the right are not as enthusiastic, and for a variety of different reasons, but they're all kind of saying the same thing, is that he's too progressive. And that this, similar to J.D. Vance, this was a pick that really catered to the core base and didn't do much to reach out to moderate voters. Walz is progressive on tax policy, for example. Minnesota, I think, has one of the 5 highest income tax rates in the country, and he raised those taxes. So economically, that's a big issue. Immigration is another huge issue in this election, one of the top 3 issues by a lot of polls. And Republicans are moaning and groaning about how Walz has been, pro-sanctuary status in his state of Minnesota, and they think he'll be soft on the border.
Mm-hmm. So Joan, in Harris picking Walz, what does it say about her campaign strategy?
Well, she did a version of what Trump did with Vance, right? She sort of doubled down on her base. I think she needed to make peace with the progressive left side of the party. I think Walz, because of a mixed record of, more moderate when he was in Congress and then sort of moving left, there isn't that much resistance to him from centrists. She kind of bought peace with the party, which she needs in that, before she goes into the convention in Chicago. And she's just gambling. He does have, I think, tremendous communication skills. He just seems like a nice guy. He's just kind of a likable guy, very eloquent. And I think she is betting and hoping that the combination of his ability to make the case for Democrats and that's enough to sort of counter the real negativity and sort of anger from the other side. When I listened to that speech, it did sort of strike a Obama-like chord of sort of raising, sort of hope and
he talked about joy.
Happiness and joy.
Yeah, I didn't expect that. Nobody talks about
joy.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, for the trust you put in me, but maybe more so, thank you for bringing back the joy.
You've been to more Trump rallies than I have, but I've never heard Trump talk about joy.
There, right?
Well, it depends on what kind of joy. There's certainly a lot of enthusiasm at Trump rallies, but the joy point is interesting because I think that Democrats also have to be careful of not overplaying this hand of we've been handed this great record from the Biden administration and we're going to go on and build something even greater. There is a lot of anger out in America. I've been from the RNC to the Trump rallies I've been to. There have been a lot of frustrations with economic policies, with immigration, certainly. And people are down on the Biden economy. His approval rating is not good on the economy, and his approval rating isn't good, period. So I think it would be foolish for Democrats to lean too heavily into saying, well, everything's great and we're going to make it better.
Mm-hmm. So Trump also recently announced his VP pick, J.D. Vance, and there's been already a lot of drama and controversy surrounding Vance, and though Trump seems to like controversy. Carine, how do you think his pick is playing out?
Well, he's certainly getting a lot of heat in the media and has said a lot of bizarre things. For example, his attack on childless cat ladies. Definitely not a great idea, but I think that the bigger issue with Vance is a similar issue I see with Walz, which is he's just doubling down on the base. And the Trump administration, the former Trump administration, having been as polarizing as it was, needed to do a lot of outreach not only to Americans, but to a lot of Republicans. There's been a lot of infighting in the Republican Party throughout the primary. Now, they've seemed to have really come together and unified behind Trump now. You have a lot of his former opponents and his greatest opponent, Nikki Haley, backing him enthusiastically, it would seem. But still, I was surprised by the J.D. Vance pick. I thought for sure he'd go for someone like Doug Burgum, businessman, governor of North Dakota, conservative, but not perceived as a culture warrior in the same way that Trump or Vance is. Somebody that normal Americans can get behind without too much grief, and very likable, not too polarizing. Or even Nikki Haley, somebody who comes with international affairs chops. She would have brought the party back together in a big way. It would have been a big sign of goodwill from Trump that, hey, this is a party for all Republicans and any American to come in. So I think similar missteps from both parties in their VP picks.
I bet Trump wishes he could have a do-over on Vance. I think the problem with Vance is that he insults everybody. It's one, he fires up, he angers everybody. He cuts across, sort of political lines. Walz offends the right. In some of Vance's statements, the childless catless cat ladies. There are Republican women that are childless cat ladies. So that, I think, is the Vance problem.
I saw Vance speak at the RNC, and I do think that he is being slightly underestimated just with the overall media storm he's receiving right now. He is a great speaker, and he has a really compelling story, and it's a story that normal Americans know. So while Walz is more of an unknown entity that people are getting to know, Hillbilly Elegy is an epic story that a lot of Americans know. They've watched it on Netflix or they've read the book. And his family is also, really appealing for American voters. He has a mixed family. His wife, Usha Vance, was a great speaker at the RNC and gave a speech about, their love story and how it became possible in a country like America. And I think he's being underestimated, though. I agree with Joan that Republicans are probably second-guessing right now with all the drama that they're receiving.
Frankly, I thought there might be two VP announcement this week. Harris picks her choice and Trump dumps Vance. I mean, is that a possibility still?
No, I don't think he would do that. I mean, what Trump has said is that the vice presidential candidate doesn't mean that much. And he's actually right. I mean, in the end, this is going to come down to Trump versus Harris. And all of this kind of drama and the stories of the vice presidential candidates, I just don't think in the end that's going to be the deciding factor in who ultimately wins. I agree with Carine. I think that the economy and immigration, those issues are really what's going to continue to drive this election. And we're just the last 2 weeks have been really, really interesting. This whole campaign has been sort of reset in a way that nobody could have imagined a month ago. Carine, when you left Milwaukee, Republicans were incredibly unified. I mean, they were getting ready to redesign the Oval Office, right? I mean, they were ready for Trump to just walk right back in. Then Biden drops out, Harris announces, everything consolidates around her, and she's gotten off to a start that I don't even think she could have ever imagined.
More of my conversation with Joan and Carine after this short break. Like Hillary Clinton in 2016, Harris could become the first woman president in the United States. That is a huge deal. And back when Clinton was running, that's what everyone talked about, this big moment. History would be made. The glass ceiling finally in the White House would be shattered. But Joan, do you think people are talking about that as much this time?
They don't seem to be, and I'd actually be interested to hear what Carine has to say about that, because I feel like it's almost kind of a generational way of looking at it. And I think that so women of a certain age, and particularly white women, were so traumatized by what happened with Hillary Clinton versus Trump, and just came to this conclusion that the glass ceiling will never be shattered in their/my lifetime. But it hasn't, come to the forefront in the same way. It will. I mean, I think, sexism is part of politics, and Trump is always good at pushing those buttons. But it hasn't really surfaced in the same way. Maybe people don't want to talk about history being made.
Because it didn't work last time.
It didn't work last time, and they just don't want to make the stakes that high.
Mm-hmm. Carine, what do you think?
I think your point on the stakes, Joan, is correct, that there's already so much at stake in this election. But when we talk about making history, this cycle has been all about making history. And frankly, I hadn't even thought about the prospect of a first female president until this conversation now. I think just because there's been so much whiplash between both parties and VPs and president dropping out and Trump gaffe, Biden gaffe, it's just like a whirlwind, and it's hard to think about the greater stakes of this election.
I mean, for the first time, I saw a story in the New York Times by their style writer analyzing Harris's wardrobe and sort of bemoaning the fact that she was dressed in the same old pantsuits and high heels. Frankly, I think she looks great, and I see no reason for her to switch. But I'm sure we'll see more of that analysis of what she's wearing and how she comes across and the female part of the equation.
Joan, I think you wrote a lot of columns on this back in 2016.
Probably.
So white women famously broke for Trump in 2016. So will they again vote for Trump?
Well, I just wrote about that in our political newsletter. And they also broke for Trump in 2020 when Biden was running against him. I mean, I feel like it's generational. women who feel like they've been burned by what happened with Hillary Clinton are thinking, have things changed enough? I mean, the environment is a lot different. What people predicted could happen has happened. Roe is gone. There's this, assault on reproductive rights. There are all kinds of culture wars that affect the LGBTQ community and other, communities that sort of women supposedly champion. So there is more incentive, perhaps, to sort of say, well, I'm going to get behind a woman because a woman could make a difference. But in the end, I mean, these campaigns are almost always about the economy and self-interest more than identity politics. So it depends where women see their interest.
So we know the Trump playbook is to be mean, call people names. Against Hillary Clinton, called her nasty. Against Joe Biden, called him sleepy. With Kamala Harris, he has tried to say she's not black. Do you think Trump is succeeding in this strategy with Harris, or do you think he's really lost his way?
Well, it's really unnecessary and also alienating to a lot of the country that has different racial makeups. Not everyone is just one race, and you don't get to choose which one you are when you wake up in the morning. So I think that was a really silly criticism, but especially silly for Trump to be focusing so much on attacks like that when he has the upper hand on the kitchen table issues here. He can make the case that, Americans are down on the economy, blame it on the Biden-Harris administration. Americans are down on a soft border, blame it on the Biden-Harris administration. So it really seems like a big distraction, and I'm surprised that he went that way in the first place. Well, I guess I'm not that surprised. But
did it gain traction in his Republican base at all?
As far as I can tell, no. I mean, I think the hardcore base is going to pick up anything he says, but I saw a lot of Republican criticism of that, a lot of criticism on the right.
Carine, you went to the Republican convention in Milwaukee. Trump just survived assassination attempt coming into the convention. We all saw the patch on his ear. The Republicans, I thought, did a great job humanizing Trump, had his granddaughter speak, very heartfelt. The Republicans had a lot of momentum coming out of that convention. How would you characterize this moment right now? I mean, do they still have momentum, or has it been stopped by, Harris and Walz?
In a lot of ways, I think Republicans have been caught off guard with the amount of enthusiasm around Harris. But again, in the end, I think they're pretty confident on the issues, the kitchen table issues, which are what really an election boils down to. Now, where they're straying, and we've kind of talked about this a little, is reining Trump in and making sure that Trump doesn't say some of the things that turn off certain Americans, whether being too childish about insults being used or too harsh about the way he talks about his peers in politics, I think is going to be really critical for the Trump campaign. But certainly the RNC it felt like not just confidence, but for some of the GOP veterans I talked to, overconfidence. People forget that a lot of Americans love Trump's no-nonsense style, and that was underestimated in 2016, which is why it was such a surprise when he won. But Republicans also forget sometimes that there are a lot of folks who don't like Donald Trump, and he can be too brash, and even if they agree with what he's saying, the way in which he says it can really alienate a lot of voters. So when you stake everything on one man and one persona, that can be dangerous. It can backfire.
I think a lot of people will be going to the polls because they don't want someone to win, right? It's less of a vote for someone, but to prevent someone else from getting into the Oval Office.
2016 is a long time ago. I think there's a lot of Trump fatigue out there. I mean, I know he has people that will be with him to the end. But if Harris continues, if the momentum behind her continues, I think you'll see like rats scurrying off a sinking ship. I think you'll see some Republicans leaving him. Not the faithful, but he's got them. They're not going anywhere. He needs to grow his coalition in order to win. So does Harris. And that's what I think is really at stake right now.
I would say, though, that a lot of the Republicans who publicly have problems with Trump, I'm thinking Chris Sununu in New Hampshire, I'm thinking Nikki Haley, they've said, and this was back when Biden was still the nominee, but that the Biden-Harris economy, country has been run so poorly that we have no choice but to back Donald Trump. And I think that Democrats should be careful, because that is a feeling that I hear from a lot of voters, is that, they don't love either side in this moment. They're not thrilled with either choice. Maybe the newness of Kamala Harris will cancel that out a bit, but Americans were not happy. A lot of Americans were not happy with the last 4 years, and I think it's important to recognize that.
I agree, but we do have a secret ballot, and we'll never know who Sununu or Nikki Haley votes for in the end.
That's true.
So, Joan, you'll be going to the Democratic convention in Chicago
That's
later.
the plan, yes.
Chicago later this month. And we thought that there could be a very dramatic contest, but now Harris has secured enough delegates to become the nominee for the Democrats. So what do you think the party needs to get out of that convention?
Well, gosh, if they can come out as united out of Chicago, as united as Republicans came out of Milwaukee, I mean, that's what they should be aiming for. If they can keep the energy and enthusiasm as high as it's been over the last couple of weeks, I mean, that's what they need, because there is a rough road ahead, and they will eventually debate. Trump and Harris will eventually debate, and I think that is going to be an important meeting.
Harris is in a honeymoon period right now, and going forward, she's going to have to thread this needle. She has to be this fresh-faced candidate, right? Yet she spent 4 years as part of the Biden administration. So how does Harris strike that balance between being a fresh-faced candidate without carrying the baggage of the Biden administration?
Well, I guess I think to a lot of people she is a fresh face. And part of it is that she didn't have the highest profile in the Biden administration. When Obama was president and Biden was vice president, I mean, you saw him at Obama's side at key moments like the Affordable Care Act, and he went out ahead of Obama on things like gay marriage. He was, I think, more of a face and a force than Harris was, which in an odd way, I think, is an advantage for her. But she does have to break on certain things. And for example, on the economy, she has to acknowledge, like Bill Clinton would do, she feels their pain. I mean, she just can't keep on saying things are great when a lot of people don't think things are great.
Joan's totally right with her last point there. Americans don't want to hear that things are great. They're saying that things aren't great. Whatever President Biden wants to say about the economy and its strength, that's not what Americans are saying. And so that's going to be a really hard thing for her to address. I don't think Democrats should be blinded by this enthusiasm. Kamala Harris is going to have a very difficult time on the economy, as Joan pointed out, but also on immigration. Overall, people associate the current chaos unfolding not only at the southwest border, but in places like Massachusetts or New York with Biden-Harris administration policies. And I think the only thing she can do there is promise to do better.
Well, I think we can all agree that the election is still too close to call, right?
Yes.
up for grabs.
Up for grabs still. So Joan Vennochi and Carine Hajjar are writers for Globe Opinion. Thank you for joining me in this very cozy studio.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Shirley.
Today's episode was produced by Anna Kusmer. Our editor is Jim Dow. Our engineer is Zuzair Ahmed. Our music is from APM Music. If you like the show, please follow us and leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us at saymore@globe.com. I'm Shirley Leung. Thanks for listening.